Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. We're going to be looking at some pretty fascinating stuff today.
Oh, yeah. What are we diving into?
Well, we're taking excerpts from the introduction of a book called Touched with Our Feelings.
Okay. And who's the author?
It's by Jean R. Zurcher, and it tackles a question that's been debated for centuries.
Sounds intriguing. What's the big question?
Was Jesus's human nature the same as ours, after the fall, or was it different somehow?
Yeah, that's a big one. Lots of different opinions on that, even today.
Right. And Zurcher starts the book with this story about his parents.
Oh, what kind of story?
Well, they taught him as a kid that Jesus, he had the same flesh and blood as any other human.
So they emphasized his humanity.
Totally. They said that even as a child, Jesus had to deal with, temptations, just like we all do.
That's interesting. So, he wasn't shielded from the human experience.
Exactly. And he even quotes Ellen White in here. She says Jesus was tempted of Satan as all children are tempted.
But resisted through God's power.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Relying on God's strength.
Which makes sense. I mean, it highlights this balance. Jesus was fully God, but he also chose to live fully human.
Dependent on his Father, just like we are.
Exactly. That's powerful.
Now, this leads into a point of debate. You know how the Catholic Church believes in the Immaculate Conception?
Yeah, meaning Mary was conceived without sin. It's how they explain Jesus being born without inheriting sin.
Right, it's kind of foundational for them. But Adventists, we have a different perspective.
So how do Adventists view it?
We believe Jesus inherited the same, and I know this might sound a little strange, sinful flesh as everyone else.
Sinful flesh. Okay, I see where the debate comes in.
Yeah, the phrase can be a bit jarring, right? It's not saying Jesus was a sinner.
More like he inherited those human weaknesses that make us vulnerable to sin.
Exactly. Think about it. We all have the potential to get sick because we're human, but it doesn't mean we're always sick, right?
I see. So we have these vulnerabilities, but it's our choices that determine if we give in.
Exactly. And this Adventist view, well, it's definitely gotten some pushback. People saying, hold on, if Jesus inherited this sinful flesh, wouldn't that make him a sinner?
Yeah, that's a fair question. How does the book address that?
Well, Zurcher brings in Francis Nichol, who points to Hebrews. It describes Jesus as yet without sin.
So Nichol's saying that Jesus had the same human nature as anyone else, but he never actually sinned.
Right, lived a perfect life, relying on God's strength to overcome those human weaknesses.
Which is a core belief for Adventists, right? It's not about denying temptation or the struggles of being human.
It's about that possibility of victory through relying on God's power.
Exactly.
And to really emphasize that, Zurcher quotes Ellen White again, where she makes it very clear, no doubt about the purity of Christ's human nature.
Important point, yeah. Because it underscores that while Jesus experienced all those human challenges, he never sinned.
Okay, but here's where things get interesting. Zurcher talks about how in the 1950s, he started encountering different views within the Adventist Church itself.
Within the Adventist?
Yeah. Some Adventist leaders, after dialogues with evangelical ministers, started to lean towards, a different belief.
What kind of belief?
They started thinking that Jesus didn't inherit a post-fall human nature, but Adam's nature before the fall, like Garden of Eden Adam. Pre-fall, pre-sin.
Wow, so prelapsarian.
Yeah. And that shift from post-fall to pre-fall human nature for Jesus, it has huge implications.
It changes a lot, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it's not just a minor detail. Zurcher lays out 7 major theological implications.
7? What kind of implications?
Well, it affects how we understand things like what Jacob's ladder symbolizes, why Jesus even became human in the first place, what his role as a priest means.
I see. Big stuff.
Even how we interpret Gethsemane and the crucifixion.
Wow, like a chain reaction. This one change impacts our understanding of, salvation itself.
And here's another layer to this whole thing. It's not just Adventists dealing with these questions.
Oh, tell me more.
Some major 20th century theologians like Karl Barth, Emil Brunner, Rudolf Bultmann, these guys are heavy hitters.
I know those names. They're not exactly lightweights in the theological world.
Right, and they supported the view that Jesus, that he had a human nature affected by the fall.
So this conversation, it crosses denominational boundaries. It's not just an Adventist thing.
Exactly. It's something Christians have been wrestling with for centuries. Makes you realize how important this is.
It really does. So what did these theologians have to say about it?
Well, for example, Karl Barth, he argued that Jesus, even though he was completely sinless, lived in the form it must take on the basis and assumption of Adam's act.
So he's saying that Jesus experienced all the consequences of sin, even though he wasn't personally guilty.
Yeah, he fully embraced the fallen human condition without being the one who caused it.
And Barth was pretty clear about it too. He said that Jesus bore innocently what Adam and all of us in Adam have been guilty of.
Powerful, right?
Yeah.
It adds this whole other dimension to his sacrifice. It wasn't just this abstract theological concept. It was deeply personal.
Absolutely. It speaks volumes about why Jesus chose to become one of us.
All right, before we get too far ahead, I think we should maybe take a breath and unpack some of these ideas a little more. What do you say?
Sounds good to me. We've got a lot to unpack here.
Okay, so we've got these major theologians saying Jesus took on, like, our fallen human nature. But what does that even mean? Like, how did they explain it?
Well, J.A.T. Robinson, he was another big voice on this. He basically said that, both Catholic and Protestant traditions have been kind of hesitant to, fully embrace what it means for Jesus to inherit a fallen human nature.
And he wasn't afraid to, call it like he saw it, was he? I mean, he even described some of the language Paul used to talk about this as bold and almost barbarous.
He definitely didn't hold back. But I think what he was getting at was this. We shouldn't shy away from, the radical nature of what Jesus did. God willingly entering into, the brokenness of human existence. That's powerful stuff. It speaks volumes about his love and compassion.
Robinson really drives that point home, doesn't he? He says that recognizing Jesus as having a manhood standing under all the effects and consequences of the fall, well, that's key to understanding how he could redeem us.
Exactly. It's by sharing our experience, even our vulnerabilities and struggles, that Christ can truly offer salvation and redemption.
It's incredible to think that this whole idea of Jesus having a post-fall human nature isn't even new. Zurcher points out that Gregory of Nazianzus, way back in the 4th century, was already talking about this.
It's amazing how these theological ideas have such deep roots. Gregory famously said that Christ healed what he assumed, meaning if Jesus hadn't taken on our, fallen human nature, he wouldn't have been able to heal it.
Wow, that's a powerful way to put it. And it connects so well with what the Adventist pioneers believed, back in the 19th century. They also held this view about Christ's human nature.
It's like these Adventist thinkers were ahead of their time, in a way. Their understanding of Christ's humanity aligns with what some of the biggest names in 20th century theology were saying.
Zurcher even suggests that Adventist Christology, as it developed between 1852 and 1952, could be considered the vanguard of contemporary Christology.
That's a bold statement. But when you see how these ideas connect with later theological developments, it's definitely food for thought.
As we're going through all this, I'm struck by one of the implications Zurcher mentioned, the symbolism of Jacob's ladder. Remember that story from the Bible? Jacob dreams of this ladder connecting heaven and earth with angels going up and down.
Oh, absolutely. It's a powerful image.
Well, Zurcher says that if we understand Jesus as having taken on, post-fall human nature, then Jacob's ladder represents something even more profound. It shows that even after the fall, that connection between heaven and earth wasn't completely broken. God was still reaching out to humanity.
That's a beautiful way to think about it. It emphasizes God's constant love and desire for reconciliation, even in the face of sin.
And it makes me think about how that changes our understanding of the incarnation. If Jesus came with pre-fall human nature, it almost feels like he was stepping outside of the divine realm into something entirely separate.
I see what you mean. But if he came with our post-fall human nature, it signifies a much deeper level of identification with us. He truly entered into the messiness and brokenness of our world.
And that changes how we see his sacrifice too, right? It becomes even more personal, more meaningful. He wasn't just going through the motions. He was fully experiencing what it meant to be human with all its pain and struggles.
Exactly. And that level of empathy makes his sacrifice so much more powerful. It wasn't just a cosmic transaction. It was a deeply personal act of love.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. We've gone from personal anecdotes to centuries-old theological debates, and honestly, it's given me so much to think about.
Me too. And the best part is, Zurcher's book dives even deeper into the history of Adventist Christology.
So there's even more to explore. But before we wrap up, I think the big question we need to answer is, why does any of this matter today?
You're right, that's the key question. If Jesus truly experienced human nature in all its fullness, how does that change our understanding of his sacrifice, his empathy, and his example for us.
It makes it so much more personal, doesn't it? Knowing that he faced the same struggles, the same temptations, the same weaknesses we do, it means that he understands us on a level that's just impossible if he had a pre-fall human nature.
Absolutely. It means he gets our pain, our doubts, our fears, not just intellectually, but experientially. He's been there. He understands.
It wasn't just this grand event way up in heaven. It was about him stepping into our shoes, into all the brokenness and saying, hey, I get it. I've been there. And I'm here to, walk with you through it all.
It's a message of radical empathy and hope.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so important today, especially when the world feels so, divided.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds us that we're not alone in our struggles. Even when things are darkest, there's a God who understands and offers us a way out.
And this understanding of Christ's human nature, well, it should impact more than just our, theology. It should change our actions, our compassion, our willingness to walk with others through their struggles.
It calls us to a deeper level of empathy for ourselves and for everyone around us.
As we wrap this up, I think it's important to acknowledge that there's not one right answer to the question of Christ's human nature.
Right. I mean, the Christians have debated this for centuries. There are strong arguments on both sides.
Exactly. This whole deep dive, it's been about exploring those different perspectives, highlighting the complexities. But ultimately, how this understanding impacts our own faith, well, that's personal.
It's not about forcing everyone into one way of thinking.
No, not at all. It's about wrestling with these ideas, seeing how they resonate with our own experiences and our understanding of God.
So it's not about finding the one definitive answer. It's about wrestling with the mystery and seeing what we find.
Exactly. And hopefully, in that wrestling, we'll discover a deeper understanding of God's love and grace.
Well said. This whole deep dive has been so thought-provoking. I'm so glad we could break it all down together.
Me too. These conversations are always so enriching.
And to all our listeners, we encourage you to keep going on this journey. Delve deeper into this book, explore different perspectives, and don't be afraid to ask those, tough questions.
Because ultimately, it's in that searching, that questioning, that our faith really comes alive.
So keep diving, friends. Keep seeking, keep exploring. And remember, knowledge is power, but only when we let it transform our hearts and minds. Until next time.